Well, good morning, gentlemen. The
Good
court,
morning.
as they say, is all yours.
Thank you. We're in session. Good morning, darling Philip.
Good morning, sweetheart. How are you?
Yeah. I'm very well. It's the only way that we get to see each other nowadays is through Keith being some facilitator of
Matchmaker, chaperone.
That's exactly. I'm not sure I want it as chaperone as well. We are Romeo and Juliet. We are Pyramus and Thisbe, you and me. There's no doubt about it. And I was considering that, and I thought, well, that's probably right, because certainly my family think that you're my boyfriend because I talk to you every day.
Yes.
But
it's an entirely platonic relationship, Richard.
It is exactly that. I don't think I've ever knowingly touched you.
No, you never have, thankfully. And
No,
with your height, that would be a worry.
That would be, because I'm a tiny fella. I'm 4'3", yeah. But I did think that it's a bit like the school disco where I always end up with the fat ginger one.
Shall we get on with the program, RB?
If you want. Philip, today, it's lovely to have these chats, informal chats about things, principally about matters legal. Today, I'd like for us to be able to talk about Lewes Crown Court.
Yes.
But by which I mean the building in Lewes.
Yes.
Because this broadcast is watched by a man and his dog from Lewes, and the dog's in the room with me here, in fact, as I speak. Just looking at it, Lewes Combined Court Centre, and I think I may have said this before, so it's never stopped me in the past. There's Lewes with 4 courts in it. There's 2 courts in what is mainly the Magistrates' Court in Brighton. There are 4
Correct.
courts in Hove. And
Correct.
in fact, there are 2 courts which have been incorporated into the system within Chichester. But I'd like
That's
to
right.
talk about, I'd like to talk about the one in Lewes, please. And I just want to start by asking you this: do you know any court? I suppose, with the possible exception of the Central Criminal Court, what's called the Old Bailey. Do you know of any criminal court that has more impressive courtrooms than Lewes?
I personally don't. The nearest I can think of, but it doesn't get anywhere too near, is Aylesbury, or the old Aylesbury Court. But that's many years ago since I've been there.
No, you're talking about the old Aylesbury Court, exactly. Yes, it's
I think I must be.
Yes.
So no, currently I can think of nowhere, certainly that I've visited. It is a magnificent building, even now.
Yes. And of the
it was built in the early 19th century.
Well,
it began in 1808, finished in 1812.
The reason I wanted to talk
the frontage we see today is very, very similar to what it would have been then. The top 3 windows, as we now know them, above the Doric columns at the entrance, were in fact reliefs when it first opened, representing the good qualities of man. It was built in the classical style, designed by an architect called John Johnson, and it was made of Portland stone. Later on in the 19th century, it was extended to be the size we see it today. It was always known actually as County Hall, because up until 1938, it was run not just as a court or courts, but also with what we would call local politics. Hence its original name, County Hall. In 1938, what was then the County Council for Sussex moved out, and they went to what's now the Pelham Hotel. They moved again to what's now their current venue, but so they went to the Pelham, and it was only then that what you and I know as Lewes Crown Court, main building, it became purely an assize court. So it was purely to administer justice on the most serious matters. So it was an assize court. There were two courts only, the ones we see today, courts 1 and 2, who in their refurbished state are pretty much as they were. In those days, there were 3 assize courts, and bizarrely, I found this quite curious, bizarrely, Lewes was the least used, mainly because the transport in the county was appalling, as were the roads. Horsham Assize Court was the main one, and the other one that was very popular was East Grinstead. Anyway, the Courts Act of 1971 created what we know as the Crown Court. It did away with the old assizes and the quarter sessions, which were even rarer, hence the quarter sessions, where High Court judges would visit, stay in lodgings, do the most serious felonies. Now, there are four, as you've said, criminal courts, but there is a 5th court in the building, which is for family and civil matters, hence it being known as a combined court centre.
Phil, I'm just going to pause you there because I see that Keith went off to get himself a coffee, and I nodded off for about 10 minutes there, and I'm glad that you covered for me. That's very kind of you.
I did warn you. You asked me to do some research, Richard, and there's more to come.
Oh, good grief. Seriously. I've heard your closing speeches, Phil. Seriously.
Well, you call them mesmerizing. Others have called them deeply soporific.
I've certainly had the experience of people nodding off in closing speeches, and it's a terrible thing, isn't it? Where you get a juror who falls asleep. I may have told you.
There's that wonderful anecdote about the jury in session dealing with some horrible sex case, and the complainant in the witness box was simply unable to say the words of what her attacker had said to her, something really, really awful.
Yeah.
What he wanted to do with her, or what he was going to do to her. So the judge asked her to write it down, and it was then passed along the jury to read. But one juror had fallen asleep, and he was in between 2 women who were not asleep. So the woman passed the note to this asleep male juror and woke him up. And he took one look at this, having woken up, and beamed at her because he thought that was her propositioning him. That is a true story.
Yes, I know it is. Yeah. There's a story about somebody who was a local barrister here and in Lewes, sat in Lewes, and then became a judge, now retired. And as a barrister, he had one juror when he was dealing with a case, and this juror was writing everything down, every point, every little thing. And he thought, I've got that juror's on my side. That's my juror. And then
How wrong that can be.
Well, it can be wrong, but he then got to his closing speech. And this juror was just sitting there sort of like that, apparently completely asleep. And so the barrister said, sorry, Your Honour, can I just have a comfort break? Thinking that it would wake the juror up and everything would be okay. So jury go out of the court, everyone goes out of the court. Come back in, there's a note from that juror who says that if Mr. X, the barrister, thinks I'm not listening, then he's wrong. And that happened.
You mentioning the term comfort break.
Yes.
A now recently retired judge from Lewes, who sat in Lewes Court regularly, Judge Anthony, and he won't mind me mentioning this.
Right.
He hated the use of that phrase. He actually would say to you, and he said to me, I learned not to say it. He said, Mr. Meredith, don't talk in riddles. If you want the toilet, just ask to go to the toilet.
Or there's always the water jug, isn't there?
Yes.
You need to have. Anyway,
incidentally, Richard and Philip, me fetching the coffee was not because I was falling asleep on board, but I do have Parkinson's and it dries out my mouth, so I need to refresh it.
No. Of course, I was only, as I say.
Keith, this is your show in every sense, but you are not immune from Barton's so-called sense of humour, I'm afraid. Now, Richard, you mentioned the other court venues.
Yes.
That fall under the Lewes umbrella.
Yes.
That means that there are 10 courts.
12, I think.
Which means that Lewes is considered administratively a very, very serious animal. Hence, we have a resident judge who becomes a deputy lieutenant, the current one being Judge Lang of King's Counsel. And that's how it's run. That no judge has a courtroom that is his or her own. And judges, again, who have retired, will often complain off the record to me about that. They were sick of being moved around constantly. I mean, like at the Old Bailey or lesser courts, they all have their own courtrooms. You know who's going to be in there. But not in Lewes. And that
Sorry, go ahead.
No, please, you carry on.
No, because some court centres, even with 10 courts, whatever it might be, they're all based in the same place. The difficulty with Sussex is that, and I know this because I practice in the courts in Sussex, I can either be in Lewes or I can be in Chichester, which is quite a difference in terms of.
Well, certainly for you. And when I was practicing, the reverse was true of me. Lewes became the particularly with my increasing disability and lack of mobility, Lewes became the furthest I felt able to go. But anyway, the old building has seen some very notable cases. I mean, even its run-of-the-mill stuff can be pretty serious. Both you and I have done, on both sides of the fence, some very serious matters that wouldn't necessarily get into a law book. But the acid bath murderer, John Haigh, was convicted at Lewes.
Court 1, Lewes. Yeah.
Dr. Bodkin Adams,
Oddly enough, Phil, at
Also,
at some stage, I would quite like to talk about John Bodkin Adams because it's a fascinating case, the Harold Shipman.
yeah, well, what you should do is you should do for the viewer, and I use the term singularly quite deliberately, but the viewer,
Thank you.
and no doubt his dog, you could do on Bodkin Adams what you did on the Piltdown fraud.
Yes, or you could talk about it as well. But he was the Harold Shipman allegedly of his time. But I've got a couple of odd little bits of extra information about him. That, but he. Well,
it may interest you both that a great friend of my family, particularly of my mum, years ago, Roy Green, married to one of my mum's best friends. His GP was Harold Shipman. And until the day he passed away, he refused to believe point blank that Shipman was guilty. Refused completely. Wouldn't hear of it.
So that's post-conviction. He still didn't believe
That's
it.
post-conviction. Yeah.
Yeah.
But, and of course there was Sean Jenkins.
Billy Joe Jenkins murder.
Correct, the stepfather.
Yeah.
That dreadful man, Roy Whiting.
Yes.
Eventually got his comeuppance at Lewis.
Murdered Sarah Payne.
A case that I think you were involved in was Coots.
Yes, I was involved in Coots.
The murder of a teacher.
Graham Coots killed his partner's best friend because he was a necrophiliac and he wanted to keep the body. And it may well be at some stage, Keith, that within reason, we can talk about that as well.
Well, the thing about Coots, beyond its grisly facts, is it still is it not, a paramount authority on how to draft an indictment?
It's exactly
the Crown Court charge sheet and the use of alternative charges in black and white rather than implicit.
Yes, and it raises interesting questions for debate. But you're absolutely right, because he was tried in Lewis, and I was the junior for the prosecution in that, and then it went all the way up to the House of Lords, and they ordered a retrial, and I was the junior in that, and that occurred at the Old Bailey. And in fact, Bodkin Adams was originally tried at the Old Bailey, where he got acquitted, but then got convicted here in Lewis. So,
if I'm not mistaken, Bodkin Adams was turned over, if you like, by the widow of a school teacher at St. Bede's. St. Bede's, of course, being the home of one of the great swindlers, Horatio Bottomley.
I think you're absolutely right about that. Yes.
That is the most interesting piece of information this program has contained, and it has not involved either me or you, Richard.
No, I know. I'm afraid.
You see, Keith is clearly a natural.
Of course, but I'm not sure a natural what. We'll just leave it there for our one viewer and his dog to decide what.
I mean, he may have a dry mouth, but when he uses it, it's to very good effect.
Listen, we're not careful, we're going to get the BAFTA award for comedy with this lot.
But I first became aware of the impact of Coots, not because of the trial, but of a case I was involved in. You may recollect that there were these huge animal rights protests at the Shoreham docks.
Was that about animal rights for huge animals? Is that what you mean, or?
No, animal rights to do with sheep in the main, the transportation of sheep. And a number of protesters were tried in Court 3 at Lewes by the then resident judge, Richard Brown. It was prosecuted in part by our old colleague, Richard Cherrell, now retired. I had a very, very minor chap, real tail end Charlie, who in the end pleaded guilty. But Coutts reared its head very early on in that case because the indictment had to be re-amended a number of times to suit Coutts. And another notable case was the tragic death of a number of firefighters at a local fireworks factory run by brothers called the Winters Brothers and their company. And they were all convicted of culpable homicide or manslaughter of those poor firefighters. Now, I mentioned Court 3.
No, sorry. Two things. Firstly, you talked about animal rights protesters. Maybe at some stage I could talk about how I represented the Brightling Sea animal rights protesters when I was really quite junior, but it was the first time I was in the national press.
Now you are showing off, aren't you?
I am showing off. Phil, if I can't show off to you, who can I show off to?
Thankfully, your volume is rather muted, so hopefully nobody can really hear you.
Well, you're very loud, Phil, so that's good. And
of course.
Yeah.
It's coming loud and clear here.
Yeah. So sorry, Phil. You're about to tell us more about Lewes Crown Court.
No. Just as we discussed pre-program, there are now 4 Crown Courts. So the upstairs area, which had undoubtedly once been used for the local politics, that became, I believe that was some sort of council chamber. That became what is now Court 3.
Yes.
At the far end of the lower corridor is what you and I know as Court 4, aka the broom cupboard.
It's a tiny court. It's a tiny,
smaller,
tiny...
worse laid out court for a Crown Court I have never come across anywhere else.
Because
and during lockdown, it was farcical, absolutely farcical. Anyway, that used to be the magistrate's court.
Phil, you've spoken enough, mate. Court 4, and you'll confirm this, I'm sure, just by nodding your head. Don't talk. If you're defending in a case, you have the right to sit closer to the jury. So the prosecution are on one side of the court and you get to sit nearer the jury. Is that correct? There's a slight nod there. I could see the sun glinting off his head there.
Always been a nodding dog, you know that.
Very much so, very much so. Court 4 is so small that if you're defending in there, you feel as if you're sitting on one of the jurors' laps, talking to them. It's hopeless.
Well, the last case I did in that court, where a very, very honest and very innocent, thank God, young man had been accused by an ex-girlfriend of indecency. I kid you not, one of the jurors, a female, was continuously looking over the front of the jury box at my notes.
Phil, what I find difficult to accept about your story there is the thought that you ever make notes.
Well, I started writing spoof things to amuse her. I didn't bother with the evidence. I just wrote sort of funny remarks. I thought that propositioning her would go too far, but
it's never stopped you, Phil. Let's be fair.
I've never stopped trying. My success rate is far behind yours.
You have a 0 success rate in that regard. Anyway, coming back to Lewes Crown Court, there's a lovely cafe there, isn't there, within the building?
Yes, if one goes through the front entrance, which is a rather cramped affair because the security is rather tight. The senior man is a lovely guy called Tyler, who runs a very tight ship and with his cronies. So once you've survived that gauntlet, run that gauntlet, you can then turn right and go down beyond Court 2, and you have the toilets and the cafe.
And just in terms of this, because the one man, not his dog, I'm afraid, on this occasion, because dogs aren't allowed into the courts. If they wanted to go there, you can confirm, they're open to anybody at any time, aren't they?
Yes, well, not only that, and certainly pre-lockdown they did, because you were very involved in this. They do open days, whereby the public can really see everything, not just the dock and the court. They can go downstairs and see the cells. I mean, perhaps we'll be running out of time now, but perhaps another time we could talk about that and move on to the prison and things like that. But the cells are a fascination in themselves. The old death cell will send shivers down your spine, frankly.
Yes. I recall because it's on the Saturday in Lewes where we have our buildings open day. So lots of buildings become available to people. Not my house, I should say, even though I live very near the prison. My house isn't open to you.
Well, who would want to see your house? Good
point. Well made.
It's like Manoir Fantôme at Disneyland.
You're very kind. But I did one of these Saturday things. So it's an open day, and they decided that we'd have a little tiny mock trial, which I prosecuted, and a member of our chambers, Sarah Tate, defended, and I lost to her. Of course I did. I've never lost to her in real court. And
yeah, I knew you'd have to give that caveat. You are such
no. She's the one. She's the one who's got the grievance about it. I promise you. But
you are such an egotist, really.
We had a trial, a little mock trial where the defendant, who I obviously cross-examined, was in fact the son of the judge, a judge that you know very well because of your, I'm not going to name him, but your common interest in a football team.
Yeah.
And I was cross-examining, and the judge intervened because he's got his son in the witness box that I'm cross-examining, and he's clearly trying to protect his son. He's an adult, for heaven's sake. And he said, that's not a proper question. And we had this quite, not exactly heated, but we had a debate, put it that way.
Well, that particular judge, who I'm very fond of, does intervene in real life.
No, exactly. Yeah. So it's very much of his nature. And I ended up asking the question anyway. And I said, look, no, sorry, I'm just going to get on and ask this question. And we had a courtroom full of members of the public because they were there for the open day. And afterwards, people came up to me and said, that was brilliantly scripted, the way you did that. And I said, that wasn't scripted. That's real life.
Yeah. Yes.
That just
I remember doing a similar one at Chichester years ago with Irena Ray Crosby, our ex-colleague, defending, and that it just wasn't scripted.
No. Of course, you know, you
How
can't.
am I doing the time, Mr. Keith?
You're just hitting 30 minutes now, so it's almost time to say toodle pip.
Okay, lovely. We've got
Well, toodle pip it is.
yes, Keith, with your approval, and you can tell me off air if we don't have it. I'd like to carry on talking to Phil next week, if possible.
Listen, we expect you to be at least a weekly feature. So the two of you had better keep your diaries at hand. Once a week and possibly twice when you're feeling in full flow.
I've heard women say that to me, but not for a while, I admit.
Well, we'll have to hear about those experiences too, I think, Richard.
Not in my company, Mr. Keith.
Gentlemen, thank
He
you
can
very
have his
much.
own slot, if you'll forgive the phrase for that.
Yeah.
Hour.
Big
We'll
kiss.
see you next week. Look
Big
forward
kiss
to it.
Phil.
Toodle pip, gentlemen.
Bye.
Thanks.